Good Saturday morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our discussion for today, October 14th, 2023, on a Saturday morning. Glad to have you along. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, of course, including Tropical Storm Sean, probably soon to be Tropical Depression. No concern about that, but there is a concern about an invest in the Atlantic that could potentially become our next hurricane, or that's at least what a vast majority of the global models are agreeing on. And yes, you can see by the title card, this is the European model, by the way. Could it get close to land? Could it get close to the islands? Could we potentially see an incoming threat? We got that all covered today. Great to have you along. And definitely great to see you watching today, and hopefully, of course, you're having a good day as well so far. Let's get started though. A lot to talk about today, of course. As I mentioned, Tropical Storm Sean, 40 miles an hour, 1,006 millibars, and I really find it how funny that this was, that it tried to last. Really tried to hold on as a tropical storm. It's kind of one of those storms that you really don't expect it to do much, but it kind of wants to last and hold on. I don't know, just for the spite of it, but it is weakening. It is 40 miles an hour. I mean, it never really was strong anyway, but it's still a storm. 40 miles an hour, 1,006 millibars, moving west northwest at 8, and it's gonna die probably within the next day or so. So really, no concern about that. No reason to really focus on Sean. It's gonna dissipate very soon, so kind of have to cross that out of our worries. But then we go to this one, this area right here, Invest 94L, basically meaning it's an area of interest, of higher interest than, let's say, some sort of random disturbance that we would see in the MDR without an invest. This one actually has our attention, so it's been labeled an invest, and it has a high chance, both within the next 48 hours and 7 days, that it'll develop and become something. And we'll look at this a little bit more closely. Probably we'll look at this most throughout the video compared to, let's say, Sean. But this one, very interesting. Kind of does take a west-northwestward track, and it does have its cone pointing towards the islands, and so do the global models as well. Really quickly, Eastern Pacific, haven't really checked what's going on there, but it does seem like there's another area of interest as well that also has a 70% chance to form. Eastern Pacific still in its hurricane season, so it makes sense, as well as, of course, the Atlantic. Let's take a look at a satellite view, though, of what's going on. You see, this is Sean, and you can see how it's basically dying out. Very little convection with it. Spin probably still there, but of course it is dying out, and it is very anemic in convection. Definitely a sign of it beginning to wind down, and of course, once again, will probably die within the next day or so. But we go to here. This is our invest right here, and you can see just how big it is. Very expansive. A lot of convective activity. Kind of died down within the last few hours, but still, there's also quite a bit of spin to it. I believe I saw an ASCAT pass from it, basically a microwave imagery, basically an image of the structure of the system, and it had pretty good structure, to say the least. So that means this is definitely on its way to developing, and all major models now, including the GFS, is in agreement that this will develop and probably become some sort of system as it moves westward across the MDR. So a lot to go over. Then we have, of course, all these X's in the mid-latitudes and the subtropics. Typical, given it's October and we are slowly beginning to transition towards winter. So obviously this will be a much more prominent feature. And of course, we also have a very negative NAO right now. So a lot of troughing out there in the mid-latitudes. Hence why you see all this convective activity in the subtropics, though it does not look like anything will develop out of these. Sometimes we could get subtropical systems out of these to kind of, try to do something, but doesn't seem like that'll happen right now. And then, of course, you see in the Eastern Pacific, there's some activity as well. Bay of Campeche, some convective activity, though that does not look threatening in terms of tropical development. Really quickly, though, I want to zoom in on 94L, and you can definitely see that there's a little bit of spin with this. Still not organized enough that it's a depression, I guess you would say. But you can see convective activity, especially since this morning. kind of has died down a little bit, but earlier you could see just how much convective activity there was with this. It certainly has a lot of moisture, so this is definitely on track to become some sort of system. And of course, really quickly want to take a look at the track of this. And honestly, I should have flip-flopped some of the slides I had, but why not? Just really quickly looking at the model track guidance, moving west-northwestward from its point right now, and all of them kind of in agreement that it'll take this overall track west-north, west-northwest over the MDR. But then you see this is the Virgin Islands right here. This is the Antilles Islands, and you can see where a lot of the models are near in the vicinity of. A lot of them get very close to the islands, and some global models still take this storm over the islands. Of course, GFS, kind of the outlier in this situation, has it very far north and away from the islands, which is what we would hope for, but it's definitely interesting, the general model consensus, and I do believe, and we'll look at that in a moment as well, the European, one of them showing that this does get very close to the island, so this might be a threat of concern to watch. In terms of vorticity, though, this definitely does have it. I did mention that. Maybe not enough, and maybe not vigorous yet to call it a tropical system officially. But, you know, you remember this from earlier this year when I would bring it up a lot. This 850 millibar vorticity map, kind of just showing, in essence, a spin in the 850 millibar level of the atmosphere. Usually the level of the atmosphere we look at in terms of lower level spin and vorticity when it comes to these developing tropical systems. And notice, this is where Invest 94L is, and you notice where there's kind of this ball shaped of convective activity. Also, you see some of these reds in here too, so there's definitely vorticity with this. But of course, I guess you could say it's a little bit more oval shaped right now, and it's not very compact and very potent yet enough that we could say that it is a tropical system, but it definitely has vorticity with it. It's definitely on its way to becoming a system, and it is definitely developing. And then you take a look at this too. How neat is this? You can see, remember I talked about a bunch of X's right now, a bunch of extratropical mid-latitude systems right now in the subtropics right now. You can see that with all this vorticity, some very strong vorticity as well. Just shows the energy that's in the mid-latitudes. Of course, once again, kind of typical for this time of year, and we'll definitely see an increase as we continue on into the winter. We'll see that increase and probably have more of those as well. But let's take a look at the global models now. European, here's the global models for the European. This is also just like this is the 850 millibar vorticity. This is that as well, just to kind of give an idea of the spin in the atmosphere, because when it comes to at least these global models, we don't really try to look at intensity right now. It's more like we try to look at intensity specifically when it actually is a system. But when it is a developing system, when it's not yet an official system, but it's on its way to, we more or less try to look at the vorticity as more of a signature of how potent it may be in terms of its atmospheric influence. So kind of want to give that idea right now. 850 millibar vorticity, and let's take this out over the next 24 hours. You can see this kind of circle-ish. This is the isotope bars in the models. This is what these lines are, and you can kind of see it gets its act together over the next 24, and then we move it out to 48 hours. You could see kind of gathering a more round shape. You could also see by these little bars here, these wind bars, you could see that kind of in a cyclonic motion. You can see this right here, kind of looking like there is some sort of closed low-level spin already associated with this. And then as we move it out into time, 72 hours, you can see vorticity shades increase. We start getting a bunch of this red in here. Definitely probably a developing tropical system by this point. And then we usually take it out to 96 hours. European develops this even more. And then let's take it out to 120 hours. A very potent system on the European then. So one model that already shows the development of this, and then even GFS2 as we take this out to 120 hours with the 0Z, with the 6Z run. I think I showed the 0Z run for the European. Here's the 6Z run for the GFS, and you notice it has it very potent too. But let's take it out back to the beginning to see what it does with this. And generally it shows the same, around 48 hours, that's when we really see this begin to develop, and then 72 hours is when it is definitely more potent. I kind of put it back to the 0Z by accident, but you get the general idea. Really begins to develop around the next 72 hours, and then by the time we get to next week, both models show this as a very potent system. And I kind of want to look at the intensity model guidance still, just to kind of get an idea. And you could see how they're very potent with this. Notice a lot of the guidance definitely make it to hurricane intensity. So that's where the idea of maybe this becoming a hurricane comes from. You see the vast majority of the consensus brings this to hurricane status. Even the GFS, this is this red kind of graph that you see here. So that's one of the major models showing it. And then also very interestingly, although kind of not surprising, because since this model tends to do that, HWRF, this is the hurricane model that we look at, and this is the model designated specifically for tropical cyclones, and you can see that too. HWRF brings us to a hurricane, even major hurricane strength. Heck, it even brings us to a category 5. Probably not going to make it there, or at least we would hope not, but certainly interesting, as it does at least bring it to a hurricane, and it does kind of show the consensus that there is within most models that this could indeed actually become a decent system. And I actually found this interesting. This is Michael Fisher from Twitter, Weather Twitter, of course, and he posted that the GFS has been too much dry with Invest 94L, talking about model runs from the last few model runs over the last few days have not really been that potent or that enthusiastic with the development of 94L up until the last few model runs within the last day or so. And he mentions that this is the degree of correction that has been, because of course the GFS was too dry with 94L, and now it's beginning to correct, and he says to a degree, a short lead in time that is a bit concerning to him. That's interesting indeed. Maybe this might be, could we see, and I guess that begs a question, could we see a further uptick in the GFS as it is indeed really beginning to catch up very quickly, at least per what he is saying. And then he also does go on to say, not sure what the model is missing. Maybe GFS is not picking up on something that the other models are, which is why now we're seeing a very strong and very quick uptick in intensity that the GFS, of course, that he's been implying GFS is beginning to pick up on. So very interesting indeed. Could that maybe alter the intensity that we're looking at with this as well? We'll have to watch that too. Very interesting though that I did want to show, maybe this does have to do with the intensity, maybe this does have to do with potentially models upticking even further, and you know that does tend to happen, as well as downtrends in the model. Lots of back and forth that does tend to happen with these developing systems. But really quickly wanted to show this. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly graph in the Atlantic, and when it comes to the development of tropical systems, it is definitely still ready. Just take a look at how warm it is across the entire Atlantic, seeing a bunch of these oranges and even reds popping up across the entire Atlantic. Very interestingly, off that strip that we would always talk about, you know, remember especially in the preseason we would always talk about the warmth near this strip off northern Africa and off the Iberian Peninsula. Interestingly enough, it's warm again there too. Maybe if this persists into the winter, this could be a very interesting picture for next year, especially since next year we'll be coming off this El Nino that we still have going on in the Pacific right now, though it has been, of course, I guess modulating, if you could say. I haven't really checked it much recently, but definitely doesn't look as potent as I remember to a couple weeks ago. But it's still there, especially in the Eastern Pacific. This whole entire region has also been warm throughout the whole entire year, especially remember in March and April off the coast of South America. That was insane. We had anomalies, I think, up to 7 degrees Celsius above normal, some sort of weird something that was way off the charts. Of course, obviously, that has cooled down. Not everything lasts for a real long time. Of course, there needs to be some sort of, balance in the atmosphere, otherwise everything will be going absolutely crazy. Well, of course, I guess we could kind of say that that is happening right now because we are lacking some sort of balance, but still, even when things are still kind of very distorted in the atmosphere, there's still some sort of level of balance that does remain. So obviously we saw that cool down, but still very warm in the Eastern Pacific, and that'll definitely be interesting into how that helps the rest of the Eastern Pacific season carry along. But obviously, at the same time, this is not expected, especially given we're in an El Nino. So obviously, this whole entire region will be warm. But the Atlantic, back to the Atlantic really quickly, a lot of warm anomalies, especially in the MDR and even in the Caribbean too. And this will be something very interesting as we head towards the next few weeks, the final next few weeks of the hurricane season, where activity is mostly confined to this region. And even right now, really, we would only be looking at this region for the development of tropical systems. Of course, we're kind of getting the anomaly with Sean, and now this potential system developing out here in the MDR. And luckily enough, I remember today to bring it up with showing that in climatology by the National Hurricane Center. If you want to know where this is on the National Hurricane Center page. Just go to the climatology section, and this will be there. But interestingly enough, this is the usual tropical cyclone points of origin from October 11th to 20th. And yes, we did have some reported development since the 1850s, since we began records in October in the hurricane season in general throughout October. There are some systems that have been recorded to develop in the MDR. It's not like something that's completely uncharted, in uncharted territory, or completely out of the blue. But obviously, one thing that you should note, it's definitely not as frequent as you could say in the Western Atlantic, where we are, especially down here in the Southern Caribbean. We have a lot of points very clustered around the Western Caribbean region, and out in here in the MDR, definitely not as much, especially not compared to, let's say, the first week of September, usually around the time that is considered the peak. And when you compare that to now, look at this in the MDR, a lot more clustered in terms of activity there, and you compare it to now, where we really do not expect as much to go on in the MDR as compared to, let's say, the first week of September. So it really does go to show the unusualness, I guess you could say, of what we're seeing right now. But it shows you the warm sea surface temperature anomalies. This could definitely be something in the making. And of course, it does prove that not always will climatology pan out. But still, going back to climatology just really quickly, going back to this, pretty sure obviously once we have this invest kind of move out of the way and move away from the MDR, and that kind of gets over with, we probably will not see anything else develop further out in the Eastern Atlantic, and we'll probably begin to focus a lot more on the Western Caribbean, where we see the usual activity, of course, for October and especially going into November. And I showed you this, very, very warm in this region. And I do think global weekly models, climate weekly models, do get pretty favorable towards the end of the month and into early next month as well, with other factors such as shear, MJO. Those do look pretty favorable, and we could go over that more in depth at another time, of course. But it does go to show hurricane season's not over. Really, it's not over till it's over. Kind of got to remember that. We still got, let's see, 6 weeks or so left of the hurricane season. Still a lot could happen between now and then, and definitely something does seem like it will happen between now and then, and it could be significant as well. So definitely gotta watch. We'll definitely keep you posted. Maybe we'll post another video today if anything interesting pops up. We'll definitely try to post tomorrow as well, so stay tuned. If you're new to the channel, please go ahead, like and subscribe. That would really appreciate it. And of course, share with your family and your friends. Keep everybody posted, especially if you have family and friends in the islands. They'll definitely want to pay attention to this, and they'll definitely want to hear this information as well. So watch out, because we might have something within the next few days near that area, or maybe even over. Really depends, of course. A lot to go on between now and the next week or so when this will get closer to the islands. But still, general bottom line is keep on guard and watch the tropics very closely. Other than that, have a great Saturday. Stay safe, as I always say. Peace, love, and kindness to all, and we will talk again soon.